6 new laws, 80 targeted changes to the criminal code, and a complete overhaul of the bail system that flips one of the most fundamental assumptions in Canadian criminal justice completely upside down. Mark Carney just announced the most significant public safety legislation Canada has seen in years. And the details are more sweeping than most Canadians realize. Violent criminals who want bail now have to prove to a court why they can be trusted, not the other way around. Not the state proving why they should stay behind bars, the criminal proving why they deserve to walk free. Fake sexualized images shared online, up to 10 years in prison, blocking someone from entering their place of worship. Police can arrest you on the spot. This is not a press release. This is a fundamental restructuring of how Canada protects its citizens. And tonight, Canada Point is breaking down every single change and what it means for you and your family. Subscribe right now because this announcement affects every Canadian regardless of where you live or how you vote.
The federal government is to keep Canadians safe. And this year, our government has introduced 6 new laws to combat crime and protect you and your kids. In total, there are more than 80 targeted changes to the criminal code to keep violent and repeat offenders off your streets, to overhaul the bail and sentencing systems, and to give police officers the tools they need to keep you safe. Thanks to these new laws, if a violent criminal wants to get out on bail, the state doesn't have to prove why they should stay behind bars. That individual now has to prove to the court why they can be trusted. If someone tries to intimidate you or block you from going to your church, your synagogue, your mosque, or your temple, police officers now have the authority to arrest them. If someone shares a fake sexualized image of you or your kids online, they can get up to 10 years in prison. In Canada, you should be able to wake up, go to work, drop your kids off at school, visit your place of worship, sleep safely at night. When our laws fail to protect those basic rights, the government needs to make new laws. So that's exactly what we did. That's how we're building a stronger, safer Canada for all.
Let us start with the bail change, because this is the one that matters most to ordinary Canadians, and the one that has been debated most fiercely for years. Under the previous system, the burden fell on the state. If authorities wanted to keep a violent offender behind bars while awaiting trial, they had to make the case. They had to prove the risk. They had to justify detention. That system produced outcomes that frustrated Canadians across the political spectrum. Violent repeat offenders released on bail, committing further crimes while awaiting trial. Victims watching the people who hurt them walk out of courtrooms within hours of arrest. Communities feeling like the justice system was built to protect the accused rather than protect them. Carney just reversed that burden for violent criminals. Now, if a violent offender wants bail, they have to stand up in court and prove they can be trusted. They have to make the case for their own release. The presumption shifts from freedom to accountability for those who have already demonstrated they are willing to harm others. That is not a minor procedural adjustment. That is a philosophical transformation of how Canada balances individual rights against community safety. And it sends a message to violent offenders that the era of automatic release is over. But the bail reform is only one dimension of what Carney announced, because the 6 new laws address threats that did not even exist when Canada's criminal code was last seriously up. Fake sexualized images. This is one of the most rapidly growing forms of abuse in the digital age. Artificial intelligence tools that can generate realistic, intimate images of real people without their consent. Images that are then shared online to humiliate, coerce, blackmail, and destroy lives. Until now, Canadian law struggled to keep pace with the technology enabling this abuse. The tools evolved faster than the legislation. Carney is closing that gap with up to 10 years in prison for anyone who shares a fake sexualized image of another person, of your kids. 10 years. Not a fine, not a warning. Not a civil matter for the victim to pursue privately. A criminal sentence that treats this violation with the seriousness it deserves. That number matters because it signals to anyone considering this abuse that Canada will treat it like the serious crime it is. Not a digital prank, not a gray area. A criminal act with consequences that will follow you for the rest of your life. And then there is the change that may be the most directly relevant to millions of Canadians who have watched with growing anxiety as intimidation tactics outside places of worship have become increasingly common. If someone tries to block you from entering your church, your synagogue, your mosque, or your temple, police officers now have the authority to arrest them on the spot, not issue a warning, not ask them to move along. Arrest them. Because freedom of religion in Canada has to mean more than a constitutional principle written on paper. It has to mean that every Canadian can physically walk through the door of their place of worship without being blocked, intimidated, or threatened by someone who disagrees with their faith. That protection now has teeth, and the message to anyone considering religious intimidation is clear. This is not protected protest. This is a criminal act, and you will be arrested for it. Step back from the individual measures for a moment, because what Carney announced today reflects something important about where this government has decided to plant its flag on public safety. For years, the debate about criminal justice in Canada has been trapped in an ideological standoff. Progressive voices arguing that tough sentencing does not reduce crime, and that the focus should be on rehabilitation and root causes. Conservative voices arguing that repeat violent offenders need to face consequences and that communities deserve protection from people who have proven they will harm others. Carney is making a different argument, not choosing one side of that debate, but asserting that the government's first job, his exact words, first job, is to keep Canadians safe, not the economy, not the environment, not trade negotiations with Washington. The first job, safety. 80 changes to the criminal code, 6 new laws, bail reversal, online abuse criminalized, religious freedom enforced with arrest authority. That is a government that has decided public safety is not a wedge issue to be avoided. It is a fundamental responsibility to be delivered. In Canada, you should be able to wake up, go to work, drop your kids off at school, visit your place of worship, and sleep safely at night. Carney said that directly. Simply, without political hedging. And then he said when laws fail to protect those basic rights, the government needs to make new laws. So that is exactly what they did. 6 laws, 80 changes, a bail system that now demands violent criminals justify their own freedom, online abusers facing up to a decade in prison, religious intimidation meeting immediate arrest. This is not a government managing decline. This is not a government retreating from difficult decisions because the politics are complicated. This is a government that looked at the gaps in Canadian law and filled them, one by one, with specificity, with consequence, with the kind of clarity that tells every Canadian exactly what they can expect their government to protect. Wake up, go to work, drop your kids at school, worship freely, sleep safely. That is the promise, and these are the laws backing it up. Subscribe to Canada Point for honest analysis of the decisions shaping Canadian life. Turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next one.